We are concluding the commandments of the Catholic Church. We're in lesson 22, the third, fourth, fifth, and sixth commandments of the church. Just got a few things to say about that. This is from the New St. Joseph Baltimore Catechism, with Jesus with a life preserver on his head, so you know that your life will be preserved by Jesus if you follow this book. The commandment, let's see, the fourth commandment of the church is to receive Holy Communion during the Easter time. The question is, what sin do you commit if you neglect to receive the Holy Communion worthily during the Easter time? Not just, you just didn't receive it, but you could receive it unworthily. Exactly how that is, I don't know. But anyway, quote, a Catholic who neglects to receive Holy Communion worthily during the Easter time commits a mortal sin. End quote. So, there you go. You got to go to purgatory if you don't receive the communion every single Easter, and you got to do it worthily, whatever that means. Then you have to go to purgatory because you committed a mortal sin. But anyone, quote, anyone who receives communion only once a year is also in danger of falling into mortal sin, end quote. So, if you don't do it, you're going to be a mortal sin. But if you do it just that one time during Easter, you're probably going to get into mortal sin anyway. So, again, you're going to have to go to purgatory. Now, we're going to look at the last one. The sixth commandment is to observe the laws of the church concerning marriage. This is interesting here. This is a quote here. A Catholic who is married by a justice of the peace or a Protestant minister is really not married at all, but simply living in sin. So, if you get married to a godly Baptist man, let's say, here's a woman meets this Baptist man, and they get married in the Baptist church. They're not really married. They're in sin. Oh, sure, it was a pastor of a church. Sure, he read scripture. Sure, they talked about how much they love God, and they read the Bible, and they said they're Christians. But I mean, come on, you didn't fall for that, did you? They're really not married at all. It doesn't count. You're just living in sin because you got married by the Baptist preacher. Quote, if a Catholic is married in this way, it is hypocrisy and a mockery of God. End quotes. Yeah, you're if somebody gets up and says that they're marrying you in the name of God, being a minister, even though they're using a Bible, even though they appear to be godly, they're really mocking God, because everybody knows God only sanctions Catholic weddings. Come on.
Well, then you and I are living in sin.
Living in sin. Woo! All these years. Look out. We were hypocrites, and we've mocked God. Yeah. God puts, quote, God puts no bond of marriage around such a couple as he does around couples who are married by a priest. When a Catholic is married at a civil or non-Catholic ceremony, other Catholics are not allowed to be present or even to send gifts or show any approval, since this is not a real marriage, but simply a terrible agreement to live together in sin. End quote. So let me get this straight here. You got two people who are just shacking up together, and that's a terrible agreement to live together in sin. So then they say, the guy tells the guy's father of the woman says to the guy that the woman's with, you better marry my daughter because they're living in sin. And so then they go to a justice of the peace, or they go to a Baptist minister to get married. Well, a good Catholic, they're still doing a terrible agreement to live together in sin. So agreeing to be in a lifetime of holy matrimony before a Baptist pastor is just as bad as shacking up together. It's still a terrible agreement to live in sin. So bad then even if the Catholic father of this shouldn't even be present, shouldn't send gifts, or shouldn't show any approval, because it's not a real marriage, because it's not done by a Catholic priest. In fact, quote, if the marriage takes place at a religious ceremony, the Catholic party is excommunicated. To have this sin forgiven, the couple must be married by a priest or separate from each other. End quote. So according to this, if a Catholic gets married by a justice of the peace, well, that's a terrible agreement to live together in sin, but they're not going to be excommunicated. But if they get married in a religious ceremony, so now it's a Baptist priest, a Baptist pastor who marries you, that is worthy of excommunication. So you're not excommunicated if you're marrying somebody at a justice of a peace. So let's say you met somebody at a bar and you're not really, the other person isn't really religious, and so you get married at a justice of the peace. Well, then you're living in sin. It's a terrible agreement to live together in sin, but you're not to be excommunicated. But if instead of meeting at the bar, you met this person at a Baptist church, and the person reads his Bible every day, prays every day, is witnessing on Friday nights to people, trying to get them to be saved and to come to church. Oh, well, you marry that person, and the Baptist pastor marries you? Oh, well, you should be excommunicated for that. The guy at the bar, yeah, it's a terrible agreement to live in sin, but you can still be a Catholic. But you met the guy at the Baptist church, excommunicated. Terrible, terrible. Now, the church does permit, it says, for grave reasons, the church sometimes permits mixed marriages or marriages between close relatives.
What?
The question is,
Go ahead.
Question number 301, page 140. Does the church ever permit mixed marriages or marriages between close relatives? Quote, for grave reasons, the church sometimes permits mixed marriages or marriages between close relatives. Such a permission is called a dispensation. There must always be a serious reason to ask for a dispensation. The reason given most often is that the Catholic party is so weak in the faith that he or she would leave the church if the dispensation were not granted. So-called love is not a good reason, end quote. So, you're not allowed to, and I think mixed marriage doesn't mean races. I think it means a Catholic marrying a Baptist or somebody else.
But they just got through saying you can't do that.
Yeah, you can't do that. But they would give you a dispensation to be granted if you would end up leaving the church if they didn't grant that.
But if they're going to grant a dispensation to marry a close relative, I thought we did away with that in the South. That's called marrying your cousin or something like that. That's not good.
Yeah. Well, and also I think it's funny. It says they would allow a mixed marriage, meaning like between a Catholic and a Baptist. That's allowed if the person would leave the church if we didn't grant it. But just think about that. If a Catholic is going to marry a Baptist and they don't want to be married in a Catholic church, they want to be married in a Baptist church, usually, I mean, if you've got two different religions marrying each other, the one that's marrying them is now going to be the new religion of the two people. So it's usually one says, say one's Catholic, the other is Baptist. Well, the Catholic isn't that strong, but the Baptist is strong. So then they say, the Catholic says, well, I don't care. I just get married at the Baptist church. So then they get married at the Baptist church. Well, the person that was a Catholic has effectively left the Catholic church anyway. So, but it says the dispensation is only granted if the Catholic party is so weak in the faith that they would leave the church if the dispensation were not granted. And my point is, if the Catholic person is weak in the Catholic church and the other person is not weak in their church, they're going to leave the church anyway, so why would you grant the dispensation? So really there's no point, and there would be no point when they would grant the dispensation. And that's Catholic Marriage 101.